on Jerusalem Dateline.
This week on Jerusalem Dateline, what are some of the foreign policy challenges facing President-elect Donald Trump in the Middle East and beyond? Will the Russian intervention in Syria lead to a new Cold War between Russia and the West? Some say it's already happening. And more refugees fleeing from Iraqi fighting with ISIS cells among them. Should the United States receive them? Plus, does Trump's election signal the end of the two-state solution for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Julie Stahl, filling in for Chris Mitchell. We're coming to you from the Haas Promenade overlooking the city of Jerusalem. But first, to Russia, where some say they're preparing for war. That's one of the biggest foreign policy challenges facing President-elect Donald Trump when he takes office. The growing war of words between Russia and the West is sparking rumors that there could be another Cold War. That fear has led to recent emergency drills where millions prepared for the possibility of nuclear war. George Thomas has that story from Moscow.
This was the scene in Moscow and across Russia, as 40 million participated in the largest emergency defense drills since the collapse of the Soviet Union.
It's all over the television. You can feel it. It feels like tensions are rising.
From high school students in gas masks to hundreds in hazmat suits to Russian Marines rehearsing enemy interceptions. Polls here show half of Russia fears a new Cold War with the West has already begun.
Of course I'm worried. To be honest, I'm a little bit scared.
Much of the hysteria fueled by growing tensions between Russia and the West over the ongoing crisis in Syria. Allahu Akbar!
Syria's army, backed by Russia's air force, has been pounding rebel areas of eastern Aleppo for weeks. But President Vladimir Putin defends his country's support, saying it's necessary to defeat Islamic militants in Syria.
We keep hearing Aleppo, Aleppo, Aleppo. Yes, but the thing is either keeping a terrorist nest there or crushing that nest while doing everything possible to minimize civilian casualties.
While polls show a majority here support Moscow's presence there, many believe the conflict has hurt their country's global standing. Add to that concern Russia's recent military action elsewhere. In early October, it moved a nuclear-capable missile system close to Poland and Lithuania, while holding several drills on its western border. Then Russia released the first images of its new thermonuclear armed ballistic missile, dubbed Satan II. A government-controlled news agency touted the missile could destroy an area the size of Texas or France. Alexei Mulovanov is an editor of an independent Russian news website. He believes the military flexing is just saber-rattling, but understands why Russia's neighbors are worried.
If you keep a rifle at home, you know you have it, and you can use it if something happens. But if you go out on the porch with this rifle every day and parade it in front of everyone, people will start giving you strange looks.
NATO is taking notice, building up troops and other resources in Poland, Estonia, and Latvia to prevent a potential incursion by the Russians. The US and Britain also just announced plans to send planes and tanks to Eastern Europe next year, joining a 4,000-member ground force in the Baltic states.
While some say the war chatter is just that, chatter, others here have serious concerns about a new Cold War that feels like it is well underway. George Thomas, CBN News, Moscow.
As Iraqi forces continue to force ISIS out of Mosul, the terror group is fighting to maintain its hold on the city. As Chris Mitchell reports, the offensive to liberate Mosul has created a new movement, a new exodus of refugees.
Already, thousands of refugees have tried to escape the ISIS rampage across Iraq. It's a trickle that could become a flood. Behind me is one of the many refugee camps throughout northern Iraq. 20,000 people live in this one alone, with another 30,000 in the vicinity. But experts warn when the city of Mosul falls, it could represent the greatest refugee crisis in decades.
There's a lot of potential for this to be catastrophic on the human scale.
Matthew Nowry leads Samaritan's Purse in northern Iraq. He says the internally displaced persons, or IDPs, coming out of Mosul today are different from the refugees who fled ISIS in the summer of 2014.
The IDPs that are going to be coming out of Mosul have lived 2+ years under the control of ISIS. And so they've seen what I believe is the worst terrorism the world has ever seen. And they have been influenced by ISIS.
He says that makes this humanitarian effort far more dangerous.
When you talk about 1 million+ people being displaced all over the desert here in Iraq, it doesn't take long for you to understand that there will be ISIS cells in those groups of people, in those groupings, which brings in a whole new set of challenges.
Despite the danger, he sees the crisis as an opportunity for the church, especially with the young people.
These youth have been watching ISIS for the last 2 years, and they know what they're being taught by ISIS. And they're about to be displaced into the region, and they're going to be watching to see who receives them and who serves them. And so we have taken it upon ourselves as an organization, and we believe that Jesus commands us to give a glass of cold water to our enemy and to serve. And so we want to be there. We want to be the hands and feet of Jesus Christ when these children and when these adults, whether it is cells of ISIS or not.
Nowry says what's needed most now is prayer.
The situation is incredibly complex. And I'd ask the church back in America, in the West, first and foremost to pray. We don't have all of the answers. We don't know how to remain completely secure. This is a dangerous calling. But I'd ask for prayers for the people themselves that are going to be displaced, that God would soften their hearts now, that they'd be receptive to the message that so many of Jesus' followers are going to be out in the desert here in Iraq trying to provide.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Northern Iraq.
It's clear that President-elect Trump will have his hands full with foreign policy issues from day one, among them the Syrian civil war and refugees. How many refugees America lets in has been controversial. Now one expert is suggesting that how many and who gets invited should be left up to the American people. White House correspondent Jennifer Wishon explains.
The United States has now welcomed more than 13,000 refugees fleeing Syria. Amid all the concerns about radical Islamic infiltrators, some suggest the American people should have a say in who gets in.
It's our country. It's our house. We decide to whom to open the doors. We decide to whom to offer a meal and maybe a bedroom. I think, of course, that should go without saying, but it doesn't.
In his recent article, Coming to America, May writes that he disagrees with those who want to close off America's borders completely, but thinks prioritizing who gets to come in by considering what's best for America is smart policy, especially when you consider that of the first 11,000 Syrians invited to live in America, only 56 of them are Christian.
Both houses of Congress and the Obama administration have recognized that genocide is taking place in the Middle East. They've designated that there are victims of genocide. Genocide means whole communities being targeted for extermination. It seems to me once you agree and understand that these communities are facing genocide, you need to prioritize those victims. And that means they get to the front of the line.
It's inaction that runs counter to U.S. policy, not to mention immoral, when you consider the lessons of World War II, Bosnia, and Rwanda. Instead, the U.S. has designated Christians in Syria and northern Iraq as suffering, but told them they'll have to get in line. And even that isn't as easy as it may sound.
They're afraid to go to the camps the UN has set up. It's not the UN's fault exactly, but they are not protected in those camps from Islamic State infiltrators, from criminal gangs, and from other people in the camp who may be hostile to Christians for all sorts of reasons.
Some members of Congress are working on giving Christians alternative routes into the U.S. In the meantime, though, allowing more Christian refugees could give Americans peace of mind.
Al-Qaeda, the Islamic State, these are not equal opportunity employers. They don't employ Christians, so it's easier to vet Christians because Christians are not going to come here in order to become suicide bombers for ISIS or Al-Qaeda. That doesn't work that way.
The Christian communities in the Middle East now under attack have survived centuries of hardships. And May says the idea that they could be wiped out in a generation is terrible. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News, Washington.
Up next, does Trump's election signal the end of the two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? Donald Trump's election has fueled speculation about relations with the Middle East and particularly in Israel. I found out that some are saying it would be a good time to overhaul the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. Many Israelis hope an incoming Trump administration will lead to a major change in addressing the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
The combination of the changes in the United States, in Europe, and the region provide Israel with a unique opportunity to reset and rethink everything.
Since the 1993 Oslo Accords, Israel and the Palestinians aimed to resolve their conflict by establishing a Palestinian state in biblical Judea and Samaria, also known as the West Bank. That direction would ultimately lead to a divided Jerusalem and the eviction of thousands of Israelis. Israeli Education Minister Naftali Bennett, however, raised the stakes when he said Trump's election could signal the end of the two-state solution.
It's no secret that I think that the notion of setting up a Palestine in the heart of Israel is a profound mistake. We have to bring alternative, new ideas instead of the Palestinian state approach.
Despite years of countless failures, including violent Palestinian uprisings, rocket attacks on Israel, and war in Gaza, the notion of the two-state solution remained. Signs of that situation possibly changing include comments from Trump advisor Jason Greenblatt saying that Israeli settlements in Judea and Samaria are not a stumbling block to peace. Trump himself has pledged to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital and move the U.S. embassy there from Tel Aviv, a move promised for more than 20 years by various candidates without any fulfillment. Former Ambassador Itamar Rabinovich believes such a move would meet with mixed reactions.
There will be happiness on the Israeli side, there will be unhappiness on the Arab-Palestinian side. There may be riots, there may be violence.
Former Israeli ambassador to the EU in Jordan, Oded Iran, tells CBN News Washington needs a fresh analysis of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
There will have to be an assessment of what didn't work with the Palestinians in the previous attempts and to come up with a new paradigm that may be more successful in attaining a solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Iran says it's important the new president finds new ways to resolve the conflict. In Israel, the feeling is Prime Minister Netanyahu should push the new president for change because no one is more pro-Israel than the Israeli people who live here. Coming up,
everyone else except for the Jewish people seem to have human rights in Europe.
How one European group is fighting anti-Semitism and standing for Israel in Europe and the UN. Thomas Sandell heads the European Coalition for Israel. That organization promotes closer ties between Israel and the European Union and fights anti-Semitism in Europe and at the UN. I spoke with Sandell recently here in Jerusalem about some of the challenges that Israel is facing. Thomas Sandell, welcome to Jerusalem Dateline.
Thank you.
Europe is kind of a hostile place sometimes for Israel. You work on Israel's behalf. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing in Europe on behalf of Israel?
A lot of the foreign policy power is concentrated to Brussels, and by being there on the ground, by engaging with the policymakers, presenting them with facts, issue briefs, and also offering alternative scenarios that they don't get from anyone else.
Now, what would you say is the biggest threat facing Israel coming from Europe?
I think there are a number of different threats. One is very obvious when we look at the demographics, the migration crisis, the threat of radical Islam. But apart from that, there's something which I sometimes call sophisticated anti-Semitism, which comes from corners of society where they try to be champions of human rights, but they have a very strange understanding of human rights. So they would say circumcisions of Jewish babies is against the rights of a baby, and also when it comes to kosher slaughter, that this is against the rights of animals. So everyone else except for the Jewish people seem to have human rights in Europe.
The boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, Europe was kind of a leader in that. Where is that heading now? Is it advancing? Is it being pushed back?
I think the good news is that there are some major pushbacks. If you look at the legal aspects, interestingly, the High Court of France have decided and determined that this is illegal. It's against international trade law. It's against international law. You also have more political declaration, like the former British government under David Cameron, who came out with this statement to say that any municipality that want to boycott Israel will have to face the consequences and also be targeted for sanctions from the government in London. Nevertheless, having said that, there is a strong undercurrent in Europe. And when we spoke with the Prime Minister, I explained and I said, listen, this is a small minority, but it's a vocal minority, and it's a very well-funded minority, and funded also with EU tax money. This is also why we started this European Coalition for Israel, because we felt at that time that there were many Christians who got the Israel message, but mostly it stayed within the four walls of the church. And as Europeans, we have to look back to what happened in the 1930s and realize that Europe and Germany was much more Christian at that time, and still the greatest crime against the Jewish people could happen in a Christian environment. So we say that it's not even a matter of how many we are, but if there is a group of people who dare to go to the places which are the tough places, politically, spiritually, like Brussels, like New York, like other European capitals, this is where we are needed.
We've seen in the Middle East in the last couple of years, with the rise of ISIS, countries like Egypt, Saudi Arabia, suddenly kind of appreciating Israel and asking Israel for help. I wondered if that might also be something that might work in Israel's favor in Europe.
So behind the scenes we see this very positive development. But on the other hand, and I'm again quoting the Prime Minister, who said that, the world is changing dramatically, and Israel has new friends in Asia, in Latin America, in Africa. Why is it that what we used to consider our closest friends are still stabbing us in the back? And there is this little clique, especially in Brussels, in these circles, who for some reason are very obsessed with Israel, very obsessed with fixing the Middle East, but who don't really care what happens in the wider region, don't care about the Christians who are being slaughtered. We have seen this as an educational challenge for us, actually to bring these facts to the leaders in a way that they can understand. So in 2010, together with CBN, we were in San Remo to commemorate the 90th anniversary of the San Remo resolution, which paved the way for the creation of the Jewish state. And most people today have never heard of San Remo. They have not heard about the mandate for Palestine. And as I said, their sense of history starts in 1967, when suddenly these Israelis came and took all the land of the Palestinians. Or even their concept of what happened in 1948 is very distorted, it's very politicized. I always say that each time we go into a meeting, we always come out and having achieved something, because the facts are on our side. It's that simple.
One Syrian refugee child's tale of triumph when we come back. Nora Dean is a Syrian boy living with his family in a refugee camp in Lebanon. And as if the struggles of living in a refugee camp weren't enough, Nora Dean suffers from a condition that makes it hard for him to speak and make friends. Here's how Christians helped.
In the refugee camp where his family lives, Nora Dean walks alone. The other kids don't want to play with him because he was born with a deformity of his tongue and has trouble speaking.
He came home crying all the time because the other children laughed at him. Even the adults teased him. He hated the whole world, and that made me cry too.
Nora Dean's mother told me that after escaping the bombings of the civil war in Syria, their family came to the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon with next to nothing.
The Lebanese government keeps us from moving. We can't find good jobs, but still have to pay rent. We never lived like this, and we could never save enough money to help Nora Dean.
Then Heart for Lebanon, which is supported by CBN, went to Nora Dean's camp and met his family. When we found out about the problem with his tongue, we paid for the surgery he needed.
I was so excited. After the surgery, I could speak normally. The other kids noticed right away, and that made me really happy.
Nora Dean now goes to school at the Heart for Lebanon Hope Center, where he's excelling at math, Arabic, and English.
I love coming to school because I get to learn about new things, and the teachers take good care of us. I also get to play with all my friends.
When I heard Nora Dean speaking better after the surgery, I thanked God. He is so happy now. Seeing him going to this fantastic school is amazing. Because of the war, my children missed so much school, but now they are learning again and doing great.
The kids at the Hope Center also get to watch Superbook in Arabic.
I really like hearing new Bible stories. I go home and tell them to my family and talk about how Jesus loves us. Every day I thank God for taking care of us and for sending His Son to take away my sins.
CBN and Heart for Lebanon give food every month to Nora Dean's family and thousands of other refugees.
I can't imagine what we would do without Heart for Lebanon and CBN. I really love them. I get excited knowing there are people out there who care about us.
Thank you for helping me and my family. I love you.
It's inspiring to see how Christians can help. And remember, no matter how hard things get in the world, the God who watches over Israel and you and me neither slumbers nor sleeps. Well, that's it for this edition. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I'm Julie Stahl. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.